Network folks going to be there. I'm sure everybody's trying to cram the rest of their weekend, knowing that they're going to be out of the office next week. So we're glad you're on the call today. We're thrilled to have Biz Gainey. He's from Florida. He's a pastor. About 6 years ago, he planted a church, Pillar Community Church. It's got a fantastic story, some things that God's done in his life in the last several years. Obviously, he's passionate about our topic. And obviously, it's a significant one. There's a huge need in our world today on that front. So we felt like it was important at some point this year to address it and do so head on. So that's what the call is all about today. So I'm thrilled you're on the call today. If you're watching this recording, it's going to be an hour that's going to be well worth your time. So let me pray for us, and we'll turn it over to Biz. God, thanks for this time and for every person that's on the call and every person that will watch this recording. As I said, it's such an important topic that needs tackled head on. It needs addressed. And God, we're doing that today with courage and asking your help to give us insight and clarity on how we can serve the people that are in our lives or in our churches that are struggling. So we set this before you. We give it to you. Pray for Biz as he shares. Just pray that it will be insightful today. In Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everyone, for being a part and for the platform. As Tom shared, everybody can hear me, right? It's all coming through. As Tom shared, this is an important topic, and I'm going to speak a lot from the heart. And I've got a presentation to share with you on some statistics, some realities we're living with, and some outcomes. But I'll tell you, I'm talking to you as a pastor and as a minister who is, and I'll tell my story in a little bit more, but as one who has come out of this addiction early on in my life and been freed from it, and then seen the ramifications of being very honest about it and open, and just kind of share some of the ministry that's been happening in the last really 5 years. But I'm going to try to share this screen, and I'll just walk through this slideshow I've got, if I can find it here. Is that coming through? Okay, I guess everybody can see that, yes?
Nope.
Okay, hold on, sorry, let me get out. Let me try this again, share screen.
You know those moments that you have as a pastor where you do the mic check and you get up to that very important moment to speak?
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, I know, man.
We did do a mic check at one.
We just went through this. I know. Hold on, let me see if I can find
No worries,
it here.
Biz. No worries at all. If you're sharing your desktop, then all you have to do is find the document. If you're sharing the document, then that's all it shares.
Okay. Let me see here. All right, let me try it one more time, see if I got it. There's the desktop. Let me see. I don't think it's coming through yet, is it?
There it is.
Okay, you got it? Let me see. Is the full screen through yet or not? Okay, we're good. Well, again, I believe that we're dealing with a pandemic at every level. You'll hear me call this also a tsunami and an apocalypse, the zombie apocalypse. I call it the porn apocalypse. So I'm going to switch metaphors throughout the presentation. But just by way of definition, a pandemic is something occurring over a wide geographic area and infecting an exponentially high proportion of the population. We have that with pornography. I'll use the term addiction, but not in a clinical, technician's term, but in just what we deal with. A group of people or a person who just is unable to get away from this and keeps feeding desires through this. And I'll use the term consumption, so I'll switch terms on and off a bit. Just some stats for you. These you've probably seen. You can get them from Barna. I've probably assembled them from a whole different host of places. 50% of religious men and 20% of religious women stated that they were addicted to pornography. This is a stunning statistic that we have that people who have admitted and confessed this. It's possibly higher, but I included this because it's rare that you hear it in such vivid language where you have people saying actually addicted to it. And again, that's probably not the clinical term as much as it is the layperson's term. 54% of men that have been polled in the last couple of years note that they visit websites frequently, porn websites frequently. This is the big stat, and you're going to hear more about this later. 8 and 10 view it monthly, and that's what they're telling us. That's 80% of the population, and I call this population the generation raised on porn, or view it monthly. That's got high ramifications. I'm 48. Here's the stats in my age. Nearly 70% of us monthly. And then if you go above that to 50 to 68, it's over right at 1/2. So you know, in the sweep the gamut of ages, this is affecting everyone. Now, this is an interesting statistic that we need to unpackage a little bit. 1/3 of men, and this is men, this is an issue with women and men, and multiple levels. We won't have time to talk about that today. We may, but these are just men who were asked. 1/3 between 18 and 30 either think that they are addicted or unsure if they are addicted to pornography. Now, that is 30%. A little over 30% of the population that we are finally seeing at least acknowledging the possibility that they are addicted to it. And if they don't like the term addiction, that's where we run into this. Well, I'm not sure. So then you start talking about, you know, consuming porn or watching porn repeatedly or habitually, and you run into these other terms. This has profound consequences. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. What we know is Christian men, particularly, we have stats on this, are watching pornography at work at the same rate as the national average, which is, again, believe it or not, close to 50%. So we have we got a big issue here, and it's prime for the church. Now, I'm just giving a trigger alert for this next slide. And that means that, again, my story, I'll tell you later, I come out of porn addiction. A trigger means that the next slide may register something that that will set off any type of struggle that you have, and it's because of the terms on here. But I want you to see this is the next slide is something that Pornhub produces, and they produce this every year. Pornhub is like the Walmart of the porn industry. Everything you want can be found in this toxic website. And they give statistics every year on what is seen and what is watched through their website, and they are very cavalier about it. And you can Google the stats, you know, and you can find this. I work with an organization called Men Against Porn. I do a lot of research for them, so this is a lot of the things I run into. But you need to see what was Googled most through Pornhub. You just need to understand when we talk about porn, what we're really talking about here. So we're very clear on this. But you may not even want to look at it. But this is the top 10 searches in 2016. If you notice, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. If you notice, the searches are stepmom, stepsister, MILF, teen, and mom. 5 of the top 10 are in what we would call the pool of toxicity. Now, there's also cartoon here on this. This is what we are doing when we are searching porn. I mean, the radical nature of distortion that we have seen, the shift in porn in the last 20 years, could not have been a harsher shift than we could have possibly imagined on our watch. So I'm going to skip through that, but it's important to understand where we are. And if somebody comes into your congregation and says, I struggle with porn, you need to know really what it's saying. Not everybody struggles this way. But here's the number of videos that were viewed last year alone. 91 billion. That's 12.5 videos for every person walking the face of the planet. This is 2016 alone. We're not talking about the last 2 decades. In one single year. Break that down a little bit more. That's 4.5 billion hours of pornography has been watched. go all the way down to the bottom, over 5 centuries. Now, when Scripture talks about redeeming the time, we have an issue on our hands. And so those are just some of the stats I just wanted to start with, just so we understand just how bad this is. And there's some realities I think we need to be aware of, and as we go through that. But first, let me tell you my story. And quickly, I just want you to know my story because I just think it's important that I speak as someone who fought this for a long time, and I still have all of the aids, I have all of the accountability measures, I have all of the protections, I have everything I can possibly have in place, even though I have not had the compulsive addictive behavior that I had for 20 years. I haven't had that in the last 15 years. I still am very careful about just my own time. And I stumbled onto it. I'm 48. I stumbled onto it at the age of 12 when this stuff was very difficult to access. Now we have these, these are basically walking peep shows or whatever you want to call them. We stick them in our pockets, and they're just not, there's no accountability measures on these. Social media apps, and that we find between 2008 and 2011, the percentage of children age 8 to 12 who saw porn increased from 13% to about 49%. 100% of that increase is through social media apps and through smartphones. And I didn't have all that. I didn't have access to all that. I brought pornography into my marriage, into my ministry, and finally I got caught. Literally during my wife's first pregnancy, and during that time, back in the late to mid 90s, Triple X Church wasn't out, just a fledgling ministry. Covenant Eyes was a fledgling ministry. We had to search far and wide for resources. I got a beautiful counselor. I worked with a fantastic pastor who disciplined me in a redemptive way, which I think is a voice I can help speak to the church of how you handle this, particularly at a leadership level, to where I began to really see victory and freedom over this. And it was probably a solid 10-year journey of ever increasing joy in the midst of struggle to really get this where I could say, yeah, I'm free, and you can be free. And it is not who we are in the first place as children of God, but it doesn't have to dictate who we are, and it doesn't have to control us. And there's a point where every porn addict or porn consumer you encounter is not going to believe that. They are so trapped in it. They're just not going to believe that there is any hope. So if anything, please hear me that I speak as a fellow victor and struggler. And I'm very committed to, I've said, seeing the eradication of porn in my lifetime. So, and I see now more than ever in the ministry what we're dealing with. So here's some things we just need to be aware of, and I'll fly through this. You can ask questions, if you need to, and we can talk because I really want it to be interactive as well. But here's my mantra. I say this, I write this. Yeah.
Hey, before you go on, could you talk to us a little bit more? Now that I'm asking the question out loud, it may be difficult, but one of the things that I'm wrestling with is how are you defining pornography? Obviously everyone on the call knows what like real pornography is, but how far do you stretch that definition to include other pieces that are just as provocative, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. And I don't know that here's my simple answer to a very complex question. I define pornography as anything that objectifies a human being for the consumption of another. So if I'm looking at another human, and in my eyes I objectify them and diminish them, minimize them to a sexual object to be visually consumed for my pleasure, it doesn't matter what they're wearing. It doesn't matter where they are, what they're doing. So I don't know. That's my kind of working definition, and that if you're diminishing personhood in someone, then you are porning them, in my mind.
How closely is your definition to some of the statistics that you shared, or is that those statistics like specifically viewing some site like Pornhub?
Yeah, these statistics came directly out of Pornhub and videos and hours that they log of people watching through their website.
Gotcha.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I was just thinking about,
Yeah.
so even some of the statistics along the lines of, I don't remember the percentages, 79% or go back to the religious one, 50% of religious people, men,
Yeah.
say they're wrestling with it, or
Yeah.
so we are, when you use pornography there, is it like Pornhub and the like?
Yeah, it's whatever those search engines would be where they're This is probably all we're directly related to internet porn consumption. Yeah. Is that it? Good. We good? You want me to press on?
Absolutely,
Okay.
man.
All right. Awesome. I say this all the time, and I get vilified for saying it a lot because the type of writing and work I do on the internet brings a lot of attention from people who just don't want us talking against the industry. But while not everyone is addicted to porn, and not everyone is, okay, not everybody is addicted to this. We are all porn addicts now, and we have to accept the reality of the type of culture we have created, that we are dealing with a porn addicted society. Whenever you have a mass of people that is well over 50% of that mass being dogged by this or consuming this, then you are tipping the scale to a cultural phenomenon that I call it kind of a pandemic, that we are dealing with this now. So somebody who is struggling with it, you are struggling with it, a friend is struggling with it, and I believe we have kind of created this culture where we just need, and things like 50 Shades of Grey to me are only evidence and proof of what I'm saying here. I think it was either Dancing in the Dark or Little House on the Freeway back in the late 80s or late 90s. MTV, porn industry moguls, a whole group of people were interviewed by the author. I don't remember the author's name now, but they had these porn media moguls, and they said, "What's your objective?" And they said, "We want to mainstream porn. That's our goal." Because back then it was kind of a seedy thing. It was a little bit, that's for those people. But they intentionally said, "We want this to be mainstream. We want moms and dads watching it. We want couples watching it." And that's what we've seen. It's been a very proactive, step-by-step, methodical, industry-wide effort to get us to where we are today. So, that's just realities. There is no such thing as safe or acceptable porn. That's something that just needs to be said. I know in this group it goes without saying, but if porn is the objectification of another human being just to satiate individual distorted desires, then it can never be safe or acceptable. And believe it or not, I run into tons of people who believe it is. This is just okay. In fact, the most recent study I read of the United Kingdom is doing a lot of work in this. They polled 12-year-olds on the top social hazards in the country facing them today. Porn fell after recycling, well down the list. So it's not even seen. It was like number 8 or 9. For whatever that's worth, there's just no such thing as safe. And here's what I am really convinced of is we have yet to see what we are going to see. It may still be a generation away because there's still unfettered access to this at every level in every society on every part of our planet right now. And so we need to be prepared for what is it going to mean that we have raised an entire generation of people globally in a generation of porn consumption. Here's some things we're dealing with now. And again, these are all kind of bizisms. These are things I see. They're not empirical as much as just dots I'm connecting. I think pornography is at the root of many social problems we face today. It is fundamentally dehumanizing, and it is fundamentally destructive. And when you consume and you watch this over time, then you understand where you get kind of the breakdown of civility the breakdown of rational, coherent disagreement into conflict, strife, management, anger. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I say what I say in a minute in another outcome. Pornography is personal slavery, and and I mean porn addiction. If anyone has ever been caught in it, you know they feel like a slave. You know they feel trapped. I believe, and I'm not alone in this, there's a host of voices who believe that it is literally fostering and nurturing the global slave trade, which is amazing. It is the third largest criminal industry in the world, is sex trafficking. And the majority of those who are trafficked are children. And right now, female children, but they're male children as well. And I think you have got to cut the head off the serpent, and pornography is the serpent. And until we deal with this, we're going to, and not just global, in America, sex trafficking is an insane problem. It's a multi-million-dollar industry in this country alone, right in our backyards. It's $1 billion worldwide industry. And here's what we're learning: porn consumption. If you're dealing in youth ministry and you've got kids who are in the youth program, I've heard teenagers say there's nothing wrong with this. And we find now that porn consumption, particularly of men, is actually increasing reliance upon male enhancement drugs and contributes to intimacy. Viagra has made out like bandits with this. And if you do the studies, you'll see that a large portion of those who purchase Viagra is now in that 20 to 35 year old age bracket, because what porn has done is desensitize them to true sexual, true emotional, true intimacy, because they're just getting it off the screen. Here's something we're seeing. The porn industry is catching on. It's attempting to clean up its act and continue to mainstream its acceptance. If you noticed across the country, we are seeing states pass substantive resolutions pronouncing porn as a public health crisis. There's no penalties or fines or taxes levied against that, but it's a resolution that is beginning to kind of sweep the nation. My guess is we'll have 13 or 14 states make this proclamation next year. So porn is catching on, and they're doing Save the Panda campaigns, and so just be aware of that this is happening. I believe that it nurtures predatory behavior. Again, the rise in predatory behavior, the rise in sex trafficking, and the irony is it's doing both. Porn is making us more impotent on one side, and it's making us predators on the other. So there's really no safe space here. It's not doing anything to create any type of goodness in the culture. Here's one that I think is worthy of a lot of examination, because I think it's important that we recognize that what I would call the experience of non-erotic same-sex intimacy has been sabotaged and decimated by porn. Now, I'm not a historian or a sociologist, but if you look at, even the last 100, 200 years, you see beautiful friendships of non-erotic same-sex intimacy. They're just beautiful friendships where there is space that is shared between one another that is intimate. And that space is gone. It's obliterated, and it's particularly obliterated with our young people. So in other words, if you have girls who are at a slumber party and they are just being non-erotic and intimate and enjoying one another, there's all sorts of confusing messages and images firing in their bodies about what is going on. Same thing with guys who are just lounging around, just goofing off. The day of David and Jonathan has passed, and that's territory the church can reclaim. And I think it's very, very important. And again, I could be wrong on that one. This is what I see, and that if you're going to dehumanize people to a tune of trillions of dollars a year, then the ramifications of that are going to be astounding across the spectrum. While porn is destructive to every human relationship, it's particularly destructive to marriage. Probably telling you guys things you've heard or know. But that's very important. There's a lot of folks who use porn as help in their marriage, and they may be sitting in your congregation. I mean, I'm a pastor. I've dealt with them in my church, in my ministry, in my community. It is just, it's flat out destructive. It is not a helpful thing. But there's a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope, and I think we in the church should have a lot of hope because we are uniquely positioned to answer the call here. Um, and um, and I've seen, what that does in my own congregation when I have been very candid and forthright and shared my story, and then partnered. He said, "I'll walk with you." I've seen the freedom that can come. I believe the greatest hope is within the church, and just getting this message out and letting people know that you do not have to stay addicted. You do not have to stay consuming. And if you deal with it in ministry, you don't have to call it addiction. Call it consumption. Call it habit. I'm not whatever, because nobody wants to be an addict. I always joke around here where I try to offer conferences or classes. Nobody's going to come to the class to get out of porn addiction, because nobody's going to admit to that thing. And so, there are different ways to attack this. There's different terminology you can use that makes people coming out and wanting to get help, gives them a little bit of courage to do that. But I do believe there is hope. And my hope is that we'll see churches all across this country become sanctuaries of safe retreat. I believe the gospel is of the greatest hope to people struggling with any addiction at any time. And the sanctuary is the place where we can really start answering these questions and addressing the problems of pornography addiction, particularly. I'm going to give you 3 ideas that I have, and there are things that I've seen that have been effective. And I would love to see this or something like this just take root in congregations or communities, all across the country. And here's why I believe there's hope. In my own life and in the people I work with, as porn is relinquished, community is restored. And as community is restored, porn is relinquished. This is important because if you're consuming porn, then you are destroying community at every level. The community that you have with our Savior, the community that you have with your family, the community that you have with your church. I've told friends of mine down here who are pastors, just stop the discipleship program, because you cannot habitually look at porn and effectively be discipled. It's just they are mutually exclusive. And again, I speak in very, colorful language. So you just understand that everything I say, test everything, hold on to the good. But when somebody lets go of porn, community is instinctively restored to them. Their heart is emboldened, their hope is ignited. And as community is restored, the desire for porn becomes less. And why is that important for the church? Because the key components are confession and community. And we do that. That's our thing, guys. That's what the gospel is all about. And so the church, I believe, is uniquely positioned to provide hope and renewal and freedom. In my own journey, you will see that it is one of honest, authentic confession, and then leaning into community at every level. And I think the church can provide these. And here's just an example of a way you might do this, as I'll probably be done in the next 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can take some questions. I call them kind of cheesy, I guess, but life in 3D, a pathway to freedom within a community of the faithful. And the 3Ds are this. There's basically a very intentional small group setting. And it probably couldn't be the only kind of small group thing you do. You probably have to think through how to make this, but this is more specifically for those who want a safe place to be healed from this. But it's a community in which you can safely and authentic discover the desires of your heart. That's the first D. Any of you have ever dealt with this know porn is a symptom of a deeper problem. And so you got to tap into what is triggering that desire and distorting that desire. And that takes a safe community for those who can't get away from it to be able to say, I really want to discover what's going on here. Is my need for acclaim, is my desire for intimacy, is my hope to be recognized. When those things don't happen, where do I run? So this community intentionally explores that. The second is then it helps direct the desires toward God. Once you have identified those desires that might be a little torn up, it's a community of people together, and I see these as probably gender exclusive. In other words, that you probably need male on male and female on female communities with these things going on. But because people are going to need to be able to figure out, okay, how does that desire get directed back toward God and His good? Believing that God is ultimately the end of all of our desires, and that anything that would replace Him would be a distortion of that fundamental desire. That we want to help men and women say, how can we reclaim that space that's rightly God's anyhow, that porn has kind of co-opted, and how can we redirect those desires toward Him? And then the last D is just a community in which those two things, discovering and redirecting desires, teaches me how to be discerning to His voice in all parts of life. I call it the nooks and crannies of life. But if I can discern the voice of God in that moment where I am battling those desires, and if I know who to reach out to, then I'm going to be more likely to take that choice of living into the freedom rather than kind of running back toward the busted desire and the pain. When I've done these, and you guys have all done probably versions of this kind of thing, accountability groups, you've offered them in your church. The thing that I found effective is this starts by saying, hey, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with you. Because guilt and shame lead to silence and isolation, and they are the two-headed demon of porn consumption. We guilt and shame ourselves to death. It keeps us isolated. When we're isolated, we break down community. We begin to feel lonely again, and we have to medicate the guilt and the shame. So porn is the natural medication in this particular case. So being in a community that helps, just saying, hey, your desires have just been distorted here. Those desires were given you by God to be directed toward Him and His good in your life. And as you learn to discern His voice in that moment and walk with a community that's faithfully discerning His voice in that moment, then you begin to discover freedom. Now, there's a whole lot of other hooks to this. These are kind of the three prongs that are very similar to accountability, excuse me, small groups and that kind of thing. I need to probably stop the screen share, and then we can go into some time of questions and answer, or I can keep the screen up if you want me to go back to something that we want to talk about, and however we want to kind of proceed from here. I'm hoping we can spend some time just in dialogue, because I'd love to also hear what you're dealing with, what you're facing, and what questions you have of anything I've said.
Hey, Biz, thanks for sharing all that with us. My question has a lot to do with how do we protect our children in our house with all the gadgets and all the everyone's on an iPad or on a Netflix, or everyone's got their own. What can we do there?
Thank you. That's a great question. And, I've got three kids of my own. One's 19, one's 17, and one's 15. So I've raised them in this generation. There are a host of tools out there that you can utilize. All the way from there are actually I don't know if you call them server blockers, but I think something called Sky Angel has just been introduced, where it goes right in through your home server and blocks everything at that level. Now, what I use is, you guys have probably all heard of it. I use more than anything Covenant Eyes. And that's just an accountability where I get an email, and I use that now for myself. I have two people that get my report every week, even to this day, 2 ministers who are buddies of mine. But I get my kids' reports every week. Covenant Eyes serves as an individual unit blocker. So in other words, it has to be on every individual piece you have.
Okay.
And
that
there's
affects things like Netflix and Hulu.
Netflix and Hulu are more difficult. I know the only way I watch both of those is if you notice on Netflix, and somebody may have a better answer to that than I do. Netflix has the parental controls in the settings, and Netflix you can view it. Go ahead. And Netflix you can view everything that has ever been watched, so there's a view history, and it's very, very difficult to delete that. Hulu I don't use, so I don't know as much about that one. But anything that would come through their computer or come through the phone, Covenant Eyes is going to pick up on. And Triple X Church has a blocker out as well. Fight the New Drug is a secular movement that is thousands strong. They have plenty of resources as well. They give you blockers and things to protect kiddos. You know, we've had just a couple of rules in our house that we all agreed to. You know, no phones in the bedroom overnight, no screens behind closed doors ever. And not to be crass, but if you've got a teenage son with their phone in the bathroom for a while, you just pretty much need to stop that. And I'm not judging every teenage boy, but I'm just telling you, we know that kids see this stuff around somewhere between age 8 and 11 for the first time, and we know 90% of those are unsolicited. I'd watch it. Social media apps have to be governed closely by parents. They are the gateway for preteens into this world. And they are intentionally difficult to govern. A book was written just last year called American Girls, and they do every year. Sociologist studied American Girls 13, 14, 15 through 19, and she did a big study on social media apps, and she noted all these things come out of Silicon Valley, which according to her research is just an extended college frat party. It is literally a pornographic culture out there. That's the type of industry that's creating these apps. So I always try to encourage my parents that I have in my church to be vigilant and to resist the urge to give this product to your kid at a young age. But I find Covenant Eyes to be very, very helpful.
Biz, are you a pastor?
I am. Yep.
So I assume you've kind of shared all this with your congregation.
Yes.
So I kind of walked through the same struggles for a long time, and shared with my congregation a few years ago how I really come out of it for a couple years, and then the following year talked to them again about the same type of thing and shared my experience, and kind of updated them on how well I've been doing in the process. And now I find myself in a space where the pressure kind of build up a little bit on that, on how well I've been doing, and even just a personal fall here and there since the last time. Now I kind of feel like I've let the congregation down, or I've let some people down, and how do you kind of go about getting back to that, being able to be open about it, but not putting yourself out there too much when you're doing something so close? That makes sense.
That's a great question. I think it's a hard one to deal with because there's certain expectations that get built up in people's minds when you confess or share anything. And what I tell everybody, and even what I've lived with myself, is it's still with the congregation. It may be a different reality with the inner leadership team I just have measures set in place where they know they can hold me accountable. I personally believe setbacks should be expected. I think neural pathways are created over time. We have scientific evidence to point to this, that literally porn addiction creates neural pathways that drive directly to that addiction and back to that addiction. When you were a kid, it's like that little trail through the woods that you took every day of your life for 5 years. It just got worn down. That's what porn does. So I try to prepare people to say, hey, setbacks are going to happen. The point is, what do you do with that setback? And I think the only option is confession and community. For me personally, as I've walked through those setbacks, some people call them relapses. I've been very open about my confession and then tried to live into community. And I don't know, when I shared my story with my congregation, and I'll refer back to it, I just am very candid and very clear that once you're over this and you're free from it, it doesn't mean that you are not attracted by it or drawn to it, and you've got to be vigilant about it. I've always tried to just be very open with it. And I know I've been in churches and leadership boards and teams that have been very grace-filled and redemptive, and also disciplinary when the need occurred, when I needed to be disciplined, especially early on. I needed to have some things taken from me. I needed to have some restrictions placed on me. I'd love to talk further about that specifically, because I don't feel like I'm really answering what you're asking in a very, at least in a very clear way. I can just tell you that when I share, if you've come out of it, we have to face it. We're a pornographic culture, and you're always there may always be a struggle with it. I don't know. That's just kind of where I am with it. Doesn't make it right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Greg, and
hey, Greg.
I'm dealing with a situation where the wife found porn on the husband's phone, and she's moved out and everything else because she says it's an addiction. He says he's got a problem, and basically she isn't gonna be satisfied until he says. He calls it a sin, and he says he needs some help, but she isn't going to be satisfied because of all her reading until he calls it addiction and goes through a 12-step process. Can you just deal with that for a minute? From your perspective, I heard you touched on it with a sentence, but what do you see is there a clear distinction between addiction and a problem with sin in that area? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Greg. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I've just, when I'm dealing with it, and I've got two actually right now that are this very same situation. I've always tried to say, I want you to be as honest as you can possibly be with this, because I don't know, we can hide a lot with our terminology. I sat with a guy a week and a half ago. He was bawling his eyes out on a Friday morning, and he said, my wife thinks I'm addicted to it and I can't get away from it, but I know that's not it. And I said, well, listen, put whatever term to it is going to be the most honest term you have at your disposal, and let's start there. And if you are compulsory behavior and you are going back to it again and again and again, then you need to call it what it is. I've tried to stay away much from those semantics. I don't say semantics pejoratively, but I think when I'm with somebody who is dealing with that, there's two things going on. Number one is the natural inclination to preserve yourself just fires at every level and in every way. And often they've not been totally honest at that point. And so I usually try to get, and I wasn't. I deal with it from my own experiences that I wasn't totally honest. And usually it takes a couple of more kind of confessional moments where they get very candid. And I deal with a lot of men who are married, and I think wives have a spider sense. you remember Spider-Man, cartoons, he started tingling, before anything ever happened. And I really leaned toward that in my own pastoral care, to say, there's probably some intuitive stuff at work that she's buried for a long time, and now it's coming out. And there's a lot of pain also. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of anger. And if your goal is to self-preserve in this moment, then you're probably at the wrong place with this thing. If your goal is reconciliation and restoration, then those, in my experience, those differentiations become minimized. And I don't know about the guy you're dealing with. I know the guys I deal with. There's still this kind of self-preservation mode that they're into, and they're come here, and they're just all kinds of sorry guys, my dog's going nuts. Come here, and they're just hiding. So I don't know if I got after your question or not, Greg.
Yeah, you did. That's helpful.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
And thanks for speaking on this. I do appreciate it, Biz, very much.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely, Biz. You handled it very, very well, my friend.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Super helpful. Other questions?
Hey, what's a good age to start talking to your kids about this stuff?
That's a great question. There's a website called educateandempowerkids.org. Educateandempowerkids.org. It may be .com, but I think it's .org. And they have a list of websites, a list of resources. And they actually have material that helps you start tackling this as early as 3, 4, and 5. Because they're talking about human sexuality, and there's things you can do there. I think so. I would go there and look at that, because I've leaned on their resources. I think as a parent, being aware of this somewhere between age 7 to 12, and helping children be aware of this, as in asking questions like, hey, talk to me about what you've seen on TV. Has anything ever alarmed you when you've been at a friend's house? Has anything ever come up that you thought was a little peculiar? Because we do know for a fact that whether the industry targets that age or not, that's the window where first exposure happens. And so I think somewhere in that, and again, every parent's different. If your kids aren't exposed to screens and don't have any, technology around them, and don't have friends with technology, that may be a different age. But my target is on the young side, 7. I think you get very intentional between 9 and 12. Spend some time with them. I think the church can help here by empowering and equipping youth ministries with resources to help and engage this conversation and help empower parents. And I think it's a great way to tackle the subject, by the way, is when anything I've done that's been any good was when I said, hey, we're going to equip parents to fight this battle. And so I found that when I've done anything to equip parents to fight this battle, I'll invariably have a dad come up and say, man, I struggle with this. And that's just a great avenue to talk about this in your church, to tackle it through equipping parents, because it's crucial. It's just absolutely critical that we address this as young as we possibly can. But I would check educateandempowerkids.org. Covenant Eyes has some great resources as well. Fight the New Drug has great resources. Those are just 3 I can throw out off the top of my head.
Biz, can I speak to that for just a second?
Yes.
I raised 2 sons, thankfully, just before the inundation of handheld smartphones. But from the time they were grade school age, my husband and I just sat them down and said, hey, if there's some time on the playground that someone says something and everyone's laughing and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about, and you just laugh because everyone else is laughing, come and ask us, we'll tell you, because we're going to actually give you an answer that is true and not an answer that's from a grade school level. And we kept that open door all the time. And so my kids asked me things like, they asked me about homosexuality, and they kind of understood what happened with men, although they thought that was weird. But what in the world do women do? And I'm like, I don't know. Middle school, one of my sons brought up, what's a blowjob? And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Right.
That's middle school. He heard it
Yeah.
at school, but he
Yeah.
came to me. He didn't just start going to his friends, because we had built this culture within our home that there were no taboo subjects. We
Right.
would address whatever they wanted to talk about. We would address it at their level of understanding. And so my boys, I'm the mom here, but my boys told me things that there were moments when I'm like, in my head, I'm going, I can't believe they're telling me this.
Yeah.
While I'm speaking, responding and being so grateful at the same time that they said those things to me. So that's just, it was huge in our household to just have an absolute, there is no taboo subject. We will talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Right. I mean, that's great. I think that's spot on. If you can have open avenue, both ways of communication, half the battle is won, because you want them coming to you. So that's fantastic.
Tom, you're muted.
Sorry, I do that too many times. You think as much as I spend in the Zoom window, I would handle the technology a little bit better. Biz, you did a fantastic job, man, handling a really challenging topic that obviously needs spoken into and needs a lot of courageous leadership. And thank you for the leadership that you're providing on that front. I'm assuming that you would be open to some follow-up conversations with anyone that would want to pick your brain by phone or email.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just whatever way you get that out, sure. Just include all my contact information, and I'll be glad to take calls, emails. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to send out your notes. So if you'll send me the most edited version, we'll make sure that we get that along with the recording out to the network, the next day or two. So, it's great having you all on the call. Same time, same place next month, third Thursday, 2:00. Look forward to next month.